Welcome to the third installment of the Dr. Benson and Mr. Heid show, the show of ephemera where all topics are considered and
everything is off topic at the end of the day.
Or something like that. So today's topic is, well, you know what, let's back up just a little bit here. I want to, of course, thank the Rights Theater for providing a place for us to record this podcast. And anything that we say does not necessarily reflect the views of anybody that's involved with the Rights Theater. We're just very grateful to have this space.
Of course, all disclaimers notwithstanding.
Yes. But also today is kind of a Mother's Day recording, not Mother's Day based, but it's occurring on Mother's Day 2019. Mm-hmm. So we certainly wish Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there, and also I'll just remember my mother, Julie Heid, who passed away, let me see here, oh my God, 29 years ago this June, I want to say June 20th, I can't remember. Anyway, So Happy Mother's Day to Mother Julie, Happy Mother's Day to Andy's mom, Steph.
Hi, Mom. Happy Mother's Day.
And today's topic is if you could sit down and either just chit-chat or have dinner or spend time with any person, any deceased person. We're going to narrow it down to deceased people. This is not an alive or dead question. Who would it be? And so we've been kicking that topic around for, several weeks now. It's one of Andy's favorite topics. Maybe you can say a little more about that?
It is. I like the idea of, people always talk about, well, if there was somebody, usually it starts out with a famous person. If there's somebody, some celebrity or some famous, noteworthy historical figure who's been long since deceased, who would you want to meet? Like, who would be your influence? Who's your inspiration? Who's someone you'd want to, whose brain would you want to pick? And the list can be endless, of course. Certain variations of this question often come down to, like, okay, what family member would you want to, sit down and have dinner with? Somebody, a grandparent or some relative who was deceased. So that always comes in too. And that, of course, would work for anybody. But I think it's interesting to, ask people and probe that question. Who, would it be a president? Would it be a famous scientist or inventor? Would it be a movie star? Would it be some sort of, maybe a nefarious figure? Who knows? I mean, would it want to be some political figure? Or there's so many things it could be. And I think it can tell a lot about a person, or at least, maybe not so much their interests, but just how they think. Who would you want to meet and who would you want to talk to?
I hope you're not disappointed in my choices.
I don't think anybody would be disappointed. It's pretty...
Well, anybody that knows me knows that mine are pretty...
I think I have some predictions, maybe, or some guesses. And maybe
take some guesses.
But I could be completely wrong.
No, that's right, but
because mine are eclectic. It's hard for me to narrow down. I don't think you'd be surprised.
Yours are going to be interesting.
I think you'd say, oh, okay.
Mine are probably going to be pretty typical, but what would your guesses be?
I would have to imagine that one, if we're keeping this to whether they're famous or not, but if we're keeping this to someone deceased, I'd have to imagine Judy Garland would be on your list. I'd have to imagine that'd be one. That's cool. I think that'd be interesting. But that's just one. I mean, do you have a guess for me? Do you have anybody? If you thought about it, I'm sure
the first thing
as far as a famous person who's dead.
Who wrote Long Day's Journey into Night? Was that Eugene O'Neill?
Eugene O'Neill.
That would be one of my guesses.
That's not a bad guess. If I had to I don't know if I could narrow it down to just two or three. I don't know if he'd make the cut, but he definitely would be in there somewhere. There is a writer on my list that I would like to meet who died actually last year. You might not know him.
Probably not.
I don't know if he'd make the complete list. Another writer, Rod Serling, of course, I wouldn't have minded meeting, but I think I picked a different one.
And that was our first podcast. Talking about
that I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
But Judy Garland was one of my guesses for you. And again, when it comes to family members, folks, obviously we all have someone who, at least one person we'd love to, have lunch or dinner with again, or at least just talk to. It could be a grandparent, it could be a parent.
Do you have a family member on your list too?
Well, I would have to pick my grandfather, my father's father. I was very close with him.
Should we maybe just surprise people and start?
We should, yeah.
Okay.
But that's who my family pick would be. But I'm actually going to keep it to three famous people, I think, today.
Three, me too. And again, so why don't you go ahead and start with one of yours?
Yeah, I can do that. The first one I would pick actually is someone I think a lot of people would agree with. I would like to, if I could, I would have loved to have met, or at least, I would love to have sat down and had dinner with him, but just to meet him and just shake his hand would have been incredible. Robin Williams. That would have been one that I would love to have just been able to meet and shake his hand and hug him and just say thank you for the laughter you've given me and so many other people. And I think that was something that was I think that was something that was kind of globally felt when he took his own life.
I gotta tell you something about that, and this is not going to be popular. I have a friend in Los Angeles, and I remember years ago asking her, and this is before, Robin Williams became deceased. Mm-hmm. I said, what what are your thoughts on Robin Williams? I don't even know how that came up. This is in a text conversation, and she said, brilliant comedian, I don't think you could ever shut him up.
Well, that could be true.
I'm paraphrasing. That wasn't exactly what she said, but I thought, I felt the same thing. And then, of course, you said that had kind of really a worldwide impact after he passed away, and I agree.
I think it was the manner in which it happened, too. I mean,
the manner in which it happened, and my heart goes out to anybody that's dealing with depression or depression related to a medical diagnosis or whatever. But now, of course, I feel like about half a centimeter tall for even entertaining that thought.
I think my candor with that situation comes down to, for his death overall, I guess. I don't condone what he did, but I can certainly grasp and understand it.
Oh, sure.
I think, I'm not saying that I think you should go do that necessarily, but I can at least wrap my head around what I think, or what we've been led to believe his reasoning was. But that aside, I think if he had just somehow fell over dead, or if something else had happened, it still would have been, incredibly a very far-reaching impact.
Yes.
But the way that it happened and how sad that was just made everybody kind of say, what? Like, what? Who and what happened? Like, it was almost like you couldn't match those two things up ever. And that just kind of slapped everybody in the face, I think.
And I personally think there's special dispensation, is it the correct word, for people who go through that spiritually?
You kind of have to hope that there would be, in a way, wouldn't you?
I can't see how there can't be.
I would have to hope. Again, I don't condone it, but I can certainly say, okay, I get it, sort of. I understand why. Sometimes you hear things of that and you go, I don't think why? And you still say that, but there's a different level to it in this case. But the reason I would like to meet him so much is not only because he was arguably the most innovative comedian of his time, just completely unpredictable and completely, his brilliance seemed to know no limits. But I also thought, we also came to realize, and a lot of people said this after his death, that they didn't quite notice this, as much as they should have. He was also a very talented, versatile actor. There was a lot of variety in the roles that he played. It wasn't, he had the roles that were so manic and comedic and typical Robin Williams, but he was also such a powerful presence as far as different dramas, like The Fisher King and Dead Poets Society and Good Will Hunting, and there's many others too. But those films, he really showcased a talent for not just, he could make you laugh until you cried, but he could also make you cry, just period. He could really tug at the heartstrings, and I think he would have been someone. I also can say, I guess the last thing I'll say about him, everybody knows Robin Williams, everybody knows his influence, but I think knowing that he was devoted to entertaining soldiers in the USO, knowing that he seemed to be a pretty charitable fellow in some ways, and a lot of people are, but I saw that, I read about and I saw interviews where he really exhibited that side, that gentle, softer side, and I thought that was very admirable as well. And I guess I know that so many people regarded him as like this teddy bear that they wanted to meet and just hug him and just, and just say thank you.
I wonder how they'd want to be remembered.
I don't know. That's one of those things that, you talk about legacy, he certainly has a marvelous legacy that's kind of unparalleled. However, it's going to be tainted by how he left the world. But again, I don't want to focus too much on his death. It's just the fact that because he's no longer with us, that's somebody that I would have liked to have. I would have made a special trip to California if he was living to go somehow find him. I don't know how that would have worked out, but I would have taken the initiative to try to meet him and just say hello and thank you. I don't know if I'd have done that. That's a little bit far, but I would have, that'd have been a guy that I would have waited in line to see, or I would have waited in line after a show to see, or I would have put forth effort to meet him. And so I guess the fact that he was so funny, the fact that he was also so talented, and I just think he brought a lot of laughter to the world in the highest possible regard, and I think that I would have loved to have loved.
Well, and we know that humor is a tonic, and
right,
God knows we need it.
And it's also, and I guess the last, again, I know I already said this, but the last thing I will say about him is that so many people after his death said, we wish we could have told him, just don't, hang in there, Robin, or something like that. And, because you mean so much to us, even though we don't know you, even though we never, things like that, that connection was really there. And I always was kind of perturbed by people making comments about celebrities who they didn't even know when they died. But that was the one where I was like, I feel that way.
Sure.
I'm with the crowd on that one.
Yes.
So that was one person, of course, deceased that who happens to be noteworthy that I would like to meet.
How do I top that?
You don't have to top it. It's just a matter of saying who would you like? Other people could say we hate Robin Williams. We never want to meet him. Why don't you know? So it's all subjective.
Well,
I mean, it's
sort of along the same line. No, it's not really because, well, of course, my first pick is Judy Garland. She died in 1969 at the age of 47, and she looked like she was in her late 60s by the time she died. She was such a gifted singer. I think she really hit her stride in her concert career. She was an okay actor. Mm-hmm. She did okay. She was good. She knew how to do it. Her time was the 1930s and the 1940s. She had a couple of sporadic films in the 1950s, and her last one was in 1963, which was fantastic.
And she was in the 50s version of A Star Is Born, right, with James Mason?
She produced it. She produced it with her husband, Joe Luft, and so that was a big deal to her. And there was the buzz that she was going to win the Academy Award for that, but alas, she did not. I think it went to Grace Kelly.
I think you're right.
For something.
The Country Girl, I believe.
Okay. Excuse me. But she is fascinating to me. I would just love to sit and pick her brain about her life experience because she is one of the first people who had the stereotypical stage mother. And, they ended up hating each other as much as they ended up loving each other. The other thing is... It's sad because Judy Garland passed away of an incautious drug overdose, and nobody knew the effects of drug use or abuse back then. It's interesting to me, especially since having read her daughter Lorna Luft's book called, Luft. Mm-hmm. It sounded like I said Lorna Lust, and actually Lorna has a story about that. Where she was one time introduced by somebody who wasn't paying attention to her name, and it was one of these gigs where she ended up performing in front of a troop of Boy Scouts, of all things.
Really?
And the guy who introduced her, who I guess was a little tipsy or something, said, "And now, Lisa Minnelli's sister, Julie Garland's daughter, Erna Lust."
Oh,
so she has all kinds of interesting stories about that. But anyway, Lorna, in her book, Me and My Shadows, Life with Judy Garland, talks about her mother's struggle with uppers and downers, which she had been prescribed at a very young age to be able to do so many movies for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Mm-hmm. As I said before, as I was starting to say, the interesting thing was, toward the end of her life, when you could see the effects of the drugs on her life, Judy was always... fighting off detractors who accused her of being under the influence or being a drug addict, and this never occurred to her. This is because this is medication that she had received since the age of 12. It was prescription medication. She was not a drug addict, and she held on to that thought until she was dead.
Right.
Lorna's insight is interesting because she was the middle child, who did most of the parental care, so to speak. She stayed with her mother until she was about 16, 17 years old, until she could finally no longer handle it. And she would ration out her mother's medication, she would hide it, she would alternately be charged with the responsibility of finding late-night, quote-unquote, doctors to provide more uppers or downers whenever Judy took them or forgot to take them or ran out. And it was quite a ride. I guess I would recommend that anybody get a copy of Lorna Luft's book, Me and My Shadows. Fascinating book. Fascinating lady. So Judy was just, she is a rare performer who can not only act out a song, but she could also really project a song. And she took pride in referring to herself as one of the last belters who could belt out a song.
It's probably accurate, sure.
And so she would be one of my picks. I think it would be just so interesting to see what went on in her head and what she would have had to say about her experiences.
Well, and that's something else real quick. Now that we both have given one person each, what would be a question or two that you'd want to ask? For Robin Williams, I would like to just say, like, how did you go through clubs, and how did you keep yourself rolling through all this, so many sets of so much stand-up comedy? How did you transition to a film career? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I think most of my questions would be based on what he did and, like, how did you do it, or what's your process? Maybe something like that. So it's kind of typical, I guess. What would you ask Judy Garland?
How did she keep such a happy outlook?
Okay.
Because for all intents and purposes, she did that.
That's how it seems. Yeah, I mean, that's...
People talk about her being, her life was so tragic, it was so awful, it was so horrible. And Lorna has said that's not how she saw it. She lived it right up until she died.
That's fair.
She,
That's a good question.
She didn't see herself as tragic. She had tragic moments, and she was pretty much destitute.
Right.
But until her last husband, and so she at least died safe and warm, but she lived her life. But 47 years old.
I actually thought she was a bit older. I forgot about that. But as far as Robin Williams, too, I think I would have said, not just for, like, how does your creative process work, but I think I would have asked him, if you're sad, do you know why? Or can you tell me why? Or is there something I can do? Or is there something anybody can do? Like, what, and he probably wouldn't have had much of an answer, I have to imagine, but who knows? I'm sure other people asked him that, too. But I think I would have had a sort of psychological aspect to it, like, what can I ask you? What can I...
You're asking all the good questions.
Right, can I make you...
I'm like, look, there's a squirrel.
No, I mean, but like, I think I would have picked his brain about how he worked as far as comedy and talent, but I think I would have also said, if you're upset or if you're, again, people said to him, you're on top of the world, how can you possibly, like, they're all, he killed himself, how could he do that? He was on top of the world. Well, apparently there had to have been some reason, so like, what, maybe I would delve into the darker questions like that, I don't know.
I wish we had a celebrity to interview to get their take on what celebrity is like. Because
there were some people who spoke about his death, about other people's death, and I'm sure at the time about Judy Garland's. I mean, they all seem to have this sympathy or this understanding, this grasp of it. Again, not saying that they would condone it, but they all seem to have this shared understanding, especially for the big ones who do that, like a Judy Garland or Robin Williams. But a second person that I would like to speak with, he just died last year. He was a very famous writer. His name was Harlan Ellison, and he was known for his prolific work in the science fiction genre. I guess speculative fiction was the way the genre was, science fiction, mystery, horror, and the like, fantasy. Wrote a lot of short stories, I think around like 1800 or something like that. He was very prolific, but he was also known for his combative personality. He was very much prone to provoking arguments and, being sort of difficult, argumentative, I guess. But he was revered in the scientific community for his fiction, and he wrote all kinds of screenplays, teleplays, again, short stories, longer works,
criticism. Can you give me a couple titles?
Well, he wrote the episode of Star Trek that he wrote, the original series, is always described as the greatest of the original series, The City on the Edge of Forever, with Joan Collins,
I
think.
That?
Yes, he did. I think it was one of those, and again, this is something else that was popular in his life.
I just watched that episode like 2 weeks ago.
I've seen that one, and it's one of those things where his script was, I think he only wrote one for the original series, and that is always put at the top of the list of the greatest episodes of that series. But a lot of times he would write stuff that was ahead of its time, and people would try to censor it. He got into a lot of clashes and arguments with executives and television people and people who tried to stifle what he was doing, one of them being Gene Roddenberry. I believe his original script was highly doctored and rewritten several times. He still received credit and won a lot of awards and got all the praise, but he was very much keen on being subversive and combative, and that's what he was known for. But he worked with a lot of the contemporaries of his time, like Rod Serling and Charles Beaumont, Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, all these famous writers.
Is there any speculation as to why he was combative or argumentative?
Well, I think what I'd like to ask him, I'd like to pick his brain again, not just on his writing and his work and his views on things, whether it be politics or the world we live in, etc. But he was a kid, from what I read about him, he ran away from home several times as a child. He was a Jewish kid in a town where there were no other Jewish kids. I think he was picked on and bullied a lot. But he wasn't very tall. He was like 5'5". He was known for his short stature, but, kind of carried a big stick, I guess. He was known for being a brawler and a fighter. I think he kind of scraped his way up in the 30s and 40s. He held a number of odd jobs throughout his teens and early 20s while he was writing. He sort of was like a Hemingway type, lived what his experience shaped his writing, I think, and he was very much living by the seat of his pants.
So there were things in his life that obviously caused him to grow up to be kind of scrappy.
Right, an only child, and he ran away from home, like I said, and I remember reading that he drove a dynamite truck in North Carolina at the age of like 13 or 14. Oh. That was one of his jobs. He was a short order cook.
No
he
danger
was
there.
A brush salesman door to door. He was a hired gun for a wealthy neurotic, was something I read. I don't know what exactly that could mean, but he held so many different odd jobs. He lived in New York City, lived in Chicago, lived in California, and eventually became famous by selling his writing. But so I like to pick his brain on how prolific he was, how he could write so much, and it's all pretty good quality. And I'd also like to pick his brain on how his childhood shaped him into who he was. If he had had a different childhood, would he have ended up somewhat different? But I think there was a writer who described him as, Harlan Ellison is the only living organism I know whose natural habitat is hot water.
Oh.
He almost has to survive with an argument. Like if he doesn't have an argument, he can't. He thrives on that type of environment. He always must be in conflict. He always must be contrasting with someone, and that kept him going. Isaac Asimov and he were very good friends, and he shared the sentiments that this guy is great, but he has to always have an argument. And I think he was very dissatisfied with the world around him, and tried to exploit that and shed some light on that through science fiction. Some of the short stories he wrote, they had wonderful titles. Repent, Harlequin Said the TikTok Man was one. And I see that the look you're giving me is like you might not have heard of it, but you're going to hear these titles and you're going to say, oh, those are odd. Another one is The Man Who Rowed Christopher Columbus Ashore. They all have some kind of dark sci-fi spin on them. A Boy and His Dog was another one. He wrote about post-apocalyptic science fiction worlds and tried to use social commentary a lot like somebody like Rod Serling would have. But he was known for just being combative, and I think that that's interesting because it got him to places where he might not otherwise have gotten. So he's sort of like a less famous Stephen King. There's a lot of people who don't know this guy, but his work is so prolific that if you delve into it, you'll find a lot of interesting things.
I see.
So that would be a second one I'd like to meet. He died last year.
Last year, how old was he?
I believe he was like 84, I think, somewhere in there.
Interesting. Just as an interesting side note, I saw an interview with Joan Collins, Dame Joan Collins, my goodness. That was relatively recent. She's 85 years old and still going strong. And somebody said, the episode of the Twilight Zone, the Star Trek,
The original Star Trek
that you were in, is probably regarded as one of the most popular. And her reaction was, I know. And she said it with like an air of...
Was she surprised about it? Or?
No, it's wonder. An air of wonder. Like, how could that be? But it was interesting that she would say that.
I'm not too well versed in the original Star Trek, but I did watch that episode only because he had written it and I had heard so much about it. It was one of those ones that was an early example of how that series could use social commentary and drama in that highly fantastical science fiction atmosphere.
Yes.
I think that was one of the reasons why it's lived on so much, especially amongst Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
They do quote it a lot. But who would your number 2 be? Do you have it?
Look, a squirrel. You have all these intellectual. My second one is Jane Mansfield.
Okay, that's not bad.
And there's a reason for this. Jane Mansfield, of course, was considered to be in direct competition with Marilyn Monroe. She was a platinum blonde actor.
I think she was. There's not much argument about that, is it? That she was pretty much a direct rival of her, right?
Well, she was a direct rival. She was. And that, in part, was by design. She wanted to go that way. And so people started off knowing Jane Mansfield as a kind of a platinum blonde sex pot. She was amply put together, and she knew it. She had just a wonderful figure. But what people kind of failed to realize is she also had talent that neither the studios or, to a lesser degree, herself really kind of expanded upon.
Was she one who was highly educated as well? Or am I
She
thinking of someone
was. She
else?
was actually trained as a violinist and pianist on a concert level, which is something that surprises people. She also had an intelligence quotient of 163. She was not dumb.
That's what I'm getting at. Like, she had a more than...
And I think that's one of the reasons why she fascinates me so, because not only was she successful in an age when it was not popular to be an intelligent woman, let's face it.
It's true. I mean...
She also became famous by the age of 26 or 27. She got a movie contract. She became a movie actor. She had 5 children. She was married, I want to say 3 times. And this was all before she died in a car accident in 1967 at the age of 34.
That's right.
So she's another person that kind of packed 2 years of life, 2 years, two lifetimes in one lifetime. I would love to ask her what she would be doing today if she were alive. I don't even know if that's a legitimate question.
No,
I guess it's as legitimate as anything else.
This whole thing is an exercise in just thought, really. I mean, I would... that I think about people like that, again, who died young, and you think, well, if they lived to be old, what would they be like? I mean, I could say that about someone like John Lennon.
Right.
What would he be like as an 80-year-old man? He wouldn't be 80 yet, but he'd be, in his 70s
Right.
somewhere. I'm going to have to think of it. He'd be, I think, around the age of 80. What would he be like how would he feel about the world today? What would he think if he had lived this long? Somebody like him, somebody even like a John F. Kennedy or a Robert Kennedy or a
Right.
Martin Luther King or someone, what would they think about the world if they had lived to be old? And again, a Jane Mansfield, a Judy Garland, or a Marilyn Monroe even. What would these people, what would they think about
I think
today?
I think Jane Mansfield would have adapted nicely had she lived. I think she probably eventually would have gone on to positions of power, perhaps in terms of being a high-powered agent for up-and-coming talent, or in some other aspect. The nice thing is her daughter, Mariska Hargitay, followed in her footsteps and is now a very successful actor. The other thing I was going to say about Jane Mansfield is she was a little bit ahead of her time in that she was kind of an early supporter of civil rights and human rights and things like that. And it's just tragic to me that she passed so early. And this is dumb, but I'm going to put it out there. I swear I heard from her, quote unquote, when I was like 17 years old. I just was really thinking, oh my God, did you do what you wanted to do? What is your existence now like? Are you? And I heard this. I didn't hear a voice. I don't want to put it out there like I'm psychotic or anything like that. And apologies to people out there that might hear voices. I don't think you're necessarily psychotic either, but I just could hear her saying, I am fine, and thank you so much for thinking of me. And I will hold on to that until I'm dead.
Well, and something else about her, I don't know if I knew this or not, was her musical talent ever capitalized on? I don't remember ever hearing or seeing her.
She did like, only in the sense, maybe in a pop sense, she did an album or two in the 1950s or early 1960s of show tunes or something.
Most people probably don't know that, though.
No, probably not. And I think that they're probably pretty rare.
All they think about is the Marilyn Monroe comparison,
They think of the big
and early
bust.
death. Right.
And early death. That's right.
That too. But again, even someone like Elvis Presley, if he had lived past the age of, 42?
Oh, that's right.
What would he be like today? He could still be alive. He'd be in his 80s. Or maybe not. But either way, he would have lived probably into the 20th century, or 21st century, rather. So what would Elvis think of music today? What would he think of the groups and auto-tuning? And, what would he think? Just that's just one little spot of it. What would he think?
That's
he probably would be pissed.
I think he would be too.
He probably. I have to imagine. I kind of hope that he would be. I kind of hope that he'd be like, "This is no good."
Right.
John Lennon would probably be like, or even George Harrison to a point of, he lived into 2001. I think is the year that he died. But, just to use two Beatles, or even someone like, who else is dead? A Roy Orbison, or famous a Roy Orbison, or a Buddy Holly, a Jim Croce, a Johnny Cash. What would these people think about music today? They probably would be a bit dismissive, I have to think. Not about all of it. Some of it is very good, they'd probably embrace that. But a lot of it, they'd say this is ridiculous, I think.
Right.
But I guess we won't be not going to know. So those are the things I think about old people, people who, if they lived to be old.
Old people.
I don't think about old people in general. If I think about people who died young and lived to be old, how would they feel about the world around us? I think my number 3, if I have to narrow this down, that I'd like to meet would be the actor Jason Robards. That might be a surprise, yeah. He's probably the reason that I've always been a fan of classic stage dramas. This is a man who, again, had a bit of a storied life. He actually was, and I'm sure people, have heard of him. Jason Robards was born.
I think a few people.
I think a few. I hope so. He was pretty famous.
I'm saying that sarcastically.
Jason Robards was born into a show business family. His father had been a silent movie actor who kind of fell out of favor with the advent of talking pictures. And again, I remember reading that kind of left Jason Robards soured on Hollywood for a while, even though he did later become a film actor. But Robards was a United States Navy combat veteran in World War II. I think he cheated death several times in combat. I remember reading about how the ship he was on was sunk by the Japanese in the South Pacific, and he had to tread water for like a day and a half.
I didn't know that.
Things like that. Like a lot of people did that, of course. But he
would be a true hero.
Things like that. He survived through a lot of combat and then became a stage actor in the late 40s and early 50s. He became famous interpreting the works of Eugene O'Neill, the dramatist. And a lot of O'Neill's work wasn't actually super famous until after he died from alcoholism, I believe, is what contributed to his death.
I thought I had heard that.
It might not have been just that, but that's what led to it. So Robards originated the role of, I believe he originated the eldest son, Jamie Tyrone, in Long Day's Journey into Night. I think he was the first to play it in this country. He wasn't the first to play the main character of The Iceman Cometh, Theodore Hickman, but he ended up playing it off-Broadway and made it famous in the 50s. And he became very closely identified with those roles. But I think one of the reasons I'd like to meet him, or I would have liked to have spoken to him, is because, again, he had this interesting, he goes through World War II, he survives all that, he becomes famous. And I believe he died at the age, I think he was in his late 70s. I think he got lung cancer from smoking, inevitably, is what did it. But he became famous, and he became known sort of as an elder statesman for actors. He was very much like the old man of the wise old man that they could go to for advice as they went along. He mentored a lot of people and things like that. But the chief reason is, when I saw Jason Robards, and there's a 1960 live television drama that they did, a live version of The Iceman Cometh, in which he played the main character. And when I saw his ferocious energy playing this very sad, very tragic character in this very long, gripping, very depressing, very sad, very powerful drama that has aroused audiences all over the world, when I saw him do that, I said, this is why if somebody asked me, why do I love live theater, why do I love this type of entertainment, that's why. His performance in that completely floored me. When I saw it, I was probably 16 or 17 when I first saw it, and ever since then, I admired the man not just for his talent, but for his commitment to create.
Was he also in the movie? I can't.
Go ahead, that's all right.
We've talked about this before, and I can never remember the name of this play, and I was in it in community theater.
He was more of a.
How sad is that?
He was in 1,000 Clowns.
That's it.
Is that the one? Yeah.
That's it.
He was in 1,000 Clowns, and again, he originated a lot of these roles on stage, and then sometimes if they made a film, he typically would go and do the film as well. But he originated a lot of roles on stage, and he became known for his craft. He became known for his work ethic. He became known for, he wasn't exactly a movie star so much as he was, a stage actor, true to his roots, I guess.
Talk more, because I want to see if...
But he was one of these guys, so he started off more, with supporting roles. He wasn't necessarily always a leading man, although he could be in films. He was on stage, but not so much on films. I think he still holds the record for the most Tony nominations for a male actor. I believe he has 8, and he won 1 at some point for a play. But he became known for playing for interpreting the works of Eugene O'Neill, originating a lot of characters there, and he became known for playing historical figures as well. There are several films and television miniseries where he played historical figures. I think he played Lincoln a couple times. He played Grant, General Grant. He played, I know he played several Civil War figures, but he became known for, he was cast in everyman roles on stage and on film, but he also could pull off these interpretations of historical figures, much like Hal Holbrook became very much identified with playing Mark Twain.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that Jason Robards was very much ingrained with Abraham Lincoln, even though he wasn't quite as tall, and also with playing other Civil War era characters. He was also in All the President's Men, and he won 2 back-to-back Best Supporting Actor Oscars for playing the editor of the newspaper in All the President's Men with Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford. And then he was also in the film Julia with Meryl Streep and Vanessa Redgrave, and he played the writer Dashiell Hammett, again, another historical figure.
Now, what was his last movie?
I believe he was one of the last films he was in. I don't know if it was the exact last one. He was in Magnolia, the ensemble drama from Paul Thomas Anderson. I don't know if you saw that one or not.
No.
He played a dying Hollywood actor.
Do you know about when that was?
Like 1999, somewhere in there.
Really? So he...
Yeah, and that was shortly before he died, yes.
He stayed active.
Right, and he played a dying man who essentially he was dying from the same disease as the character he was playing. But he was very active in stage, film, television. He did it all. He also had a very profound voice, a very recognizable voice. He had a very musky, crackling voice that, again, for audio recordings and for different historical recordings or interpretations, he was able to voice historical characters. He was able to voice regular people as well. So I think, again, my main reason for wanting to meet him is that I saw that live television drama and I thought this is like nothing I've ever seen before.
What would you ask him?
I would ask him Mr. Robards, how did you go? Again, he had some privilege because his father was a famous movie actor. His father may not have been as successful later on as he hoped he had been because of the advent of sound pictures as opposed to silent ones. But I would ask him, even with that privilege, you went off to war like everybody else did. You could have gotten killed several times. You survived you saw horrible things, and you survived all this combat. And you come out of the war, and you go to New York City, and you start from the bottom. You start working as much as you can, doing odd jobs while trying to act. And eventually, and I think it wasn't until probably his mid-30s that he really got anywhere. And it wasn't only until probably his 40s or so that he got into films more. How did you keep going? How did you do this? Did you ever think like, I'm going to give this another year and then I'm going to stop? Like, how did you get going, and how did that work? And I'd also like to ask him about, he never met O'Neill. He was dead before he really, got famous. But I'd like to ask Jason Robards, how did you come up with your interpretations of these characters, these raw, volatile, weak, angry, heartbreaking characters, strong but also weak? Anybody who knows the dramas of O'Neill know that they're long and sometimes exhausting. They're brilliant, but not to watch them so much, but to perform them. They would be exhausting.
Sometimes, like our podcast. I'm just joking.
Well, it could be.
It's all off topic by the end of the day.
By the end of the day, it's all off topic.
But anyway.
I would like to ask him, how did you come up with those interpretations? Because those dramas are not easy to do. I don't mean so much exhausting to watch, they're gripping to watch, but to create them on stage night after night after night after night after night for maybe a year.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but how do you keep the energy?
Right. You could ask anybody that, like if you're in a musical, how do you do that, But like it's...
Well, for something so emotionally
draining and intense, yes. How did you keep doing that? I don't know if he would say, I just did it, or if he'd say, I had a process.
Or maybe he drank.
Well, he did drink, I think. He was known for that as well.
But, that's another topic altogether.
Right,
That
didn't
keep him from being great.
No, I think that was something he shared with the characters, not just the writer of those works, but the characters he played was alcoholism. But that aside, he had this remarkable energy that really became, the model he set, a lot of people followed. People like Frank Langella and Matthew Broderick and many others, I'm not, who are escaping my mind right now, but many people regarded him as such an influence. Kevin Spacey was another one who, people said this is a guy that we wanted to be like. Mm-hmm. He wasn't this, George Clooney-esque movie star, but he wasn't a Tom Cruise or a Brad Pitt, but he was this remarkable presence.
George Clooney might have something to say to you about that.
Well,
Tom Cruise, who cares?
When that happens, I'll address it.
And he would probably say, you know what, go you.
But it's one of those things where I thought he was, again, such a unique figure that the more I think that certain fans of theater, they might not think of him right away, but the more they listen to what I'm saying and the more that they thought about it, they'd say, you know what, we would kind of like to meet him.
We can't make fun of George Clooney because his aunt was Rosemary Clooney, who was one of my very favoriteest of all-time singers.
Well, that's okay, but why can't I make fun of him? It's okay. I don't mind Rosemary, but what about George?
Because his aunt is Rosemary Clooney. Conversation over.
Okay, fine.
No.
Conversation over.
No, it's not over.
Your argument is done.
Your argument is done. No, but yes.
So I guess my list comes down to an actor, a writer, I guess two actors, a comedian, we'll say, Robin Williams, an actor, and then a stage actor and a writer.
And that's excellent.
And I have historical figures too, but they're I don't know if I can narrow it down to just one. That's
we may want to save that for a future podcast, because I think this is something that we could do forever. Before I talk about my third, I wanted to say one thing that I remembered about Judy Garland, which I think pretty much sums up her whole existence. There is a story that at the end of her life, probably within the last 2 or 3 years of her life, a kind of snarky reporter came up to her and said, "So, how many times have you sung Over the Rainbow, Miss Garland?" And she just kind of flippantly just said, "I got rainbows out my ass, honey." Completely shut her down. And I think that just says something about her, the strength and the resilience that she had. She was not one to be trifled with, despite.
That's probably, I'd want to be able to, I think, I would hope that I could have a witty response like that. Maybe not quite that one, but something like that.
She was always like that, and despite her dependence upon prescription medication, it's been said by many people that she never lost her wit. She never lost that.
And there's something to be said for that, I think.
And I think that's very
It's a
interesting.
broad topic, of course, but there is definitely something to be said for that. So who would be your third?
Well, my third is somebody that I really don't know a lot about, but I've thought about this several times over several years. I'd like to sit down with Oscar Wilde.
Okay. So we're keeping an entertainment
We are.
actor,
I
writer
don't
type
think-
of...
Yeah, we didn't really intend
So
to do that.
we could do another segment where we talk
We-
about others, historical figures,
Could
maybe, or something
definitely
like
do
that,
that.
different category. But anyway, Oscar Wilde.
Well, yeah, of course, the writer of The Importance of Being Earnest, and of course other things. But
That's probably
just
my
from
favorite
his
of his.
personal life, how did he handle being an open gay man in the late 1800s? And of course, we know that there was intense hardship with that. He went to jail for sodomy.
I recall reading about that.
And
yes.
he did not die peacefully. I forget how he passed. Boy, I'm going to sound so ignorant. But it was not a peaceful death.
I don't recall, but I recall reading about his entire life, and it was not he did not go gentle into that good night.
He did not go gentle into that good night. But you see pictures of him, and it's almost like they have kind of a haunting quality to me, because I see this youth, I see this person just being who he was despite all odds in a period when it obviously was not acceptable to be a gay person. And I would ask him, what would your advice be to people today? And they don't even have to be gay. What would you say is the best way for people to be authentic? Because I think if nothing else, he was authentic.
I think that's fair, yeah. What is the best way to be authentic? What is the best way to get on?
Yeah.
To get along, or to get on, I guess, and that's fair.
And what would you do with your life if you had lived past he wasn't old either. Was he 50, 60?
That I don't know.
He was not.
I don't think he was too old, though.
He was not old.
But that could be said for a lot of people, of course. How did you deal with the absurd, extreme, whatever you want to call it, prejudice, restriction of the way you wanted to live? And that's, especially back then. I mean, even today, to a point, you can say things, but at least it's better than then, I think. But how, and that could be said for racial issues. That could be said for sexual orientation. That could be said for a lot of different things.
Women's rights.
That too, yes.
Civil rights.
Again, we could ask Susan B. Anthony, how did you start what you were doing? Did you just get mad one day and do it? But
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Exactly. And that's something that I'll admit I don't know too much about Oscar Wilde. The Importance of Being Earnest is probably my favorite of his works. I have read a couple others, but that's probably the one that I think is somewhat mainstream accessible as much as the others.
And he was another one who maintained his wit till the end. And I'm going to mess up this. I'm paraphrasing. He said, what was the quote that he said toward the end of his life? Oh gosh, what was it? Something about it's between the wallpaper and myself, and one of us has got to go.
I'm not sure.
And I wish I could, and I totally messed up the paraphrasing.
Well, that's okay. He was known for his wit, of course, and he was known for, I guess, that might have been his stifling mechanism to say to people, like, I can be witty even though I'm not, I know that I'm a rarity and I'm an obscurity in these times, but that's the way I'm going to combat that.
Humor as a coping mechanism.
Right,
and
humor
Judy
and
Garland
wit.
certainly had that, and I think that's something that I really admire in people.
I think I do too. I don't know the quote. I'm trying to think too. I'm sorry.
Well, we could look it up if I could get
fill
my
that in.
internet to work, but despite the fact, like I said, this is 2019. Getting back to the subject of using wit and humor as a coping mechanism, that's always been very important to me. And as a matter of fact, my mother did that, and I didn't realize that until years after her death, that was just one of her ways of coping with some of the depression that she may not have realized that she had. So I am always interested in learning about people who use that as a coping mechanism.
Let me see here. My internet is working.
Your internet works. What's your secret?
I don't know. Wilde said something to the effect of, "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death. One or other of us has to go." So that was, I guess, is that the one you were thinking of?
Yes, that was it.
He also said, "Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken."
I like that.
And there's many here, but the truth is rarely pure and never simple. I kind of like that. And one last one. He said, "There are only two tragedies in life. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it."
That's deep, if you think about it.
It is very deep, yeah, and I guess that's true to a
And it
point.
reminds me, and I'm going to paraphrase this too, but Judy Garland said, always be a first-rate version of yourself and never a second-rate imitation of anybody else.
I like that. That's a good way to end this, with some quotes. I do. Harlan Ellison,
I
the
agree.
second guy that I picked, Harlan Ellison said many things, but one of the things he was very adamant about was he said, you are not entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to an informed opinion.
I'm entitled to my opinion.
But is it informed?
Not always.
You can. I'm not saying we have to agree with it. You can debate it. I like that personally, but I mean,
I personally prefer informed opinions. I guess what I'm
I think
saying
we all
is
do at the end of the day, but
there
it's
are
one of those
times-
things where you have to keep yourself in check, I guess. I'm sure
You keep
he wasn't
yourself-
always. This is a guy who wasn't always right about everything either, but he was very big on don't tell me something just to tell me something. If you can give me if you have an informed opinion, I'll listen to you. We can work
Right.
off that. But when you say something that isn't informed, that was where he stopped. So I always like that. You are not entitled to your opinion. You are entitled to your informed opinion.
Joking aside, I agree with that.
I think Robin Williams said, James Lipton on the Actors Studio asked Robin Williams, one of the questions he would ask people, kind of like these questions we're asking ourselves, James Lipton would ask people, when you die and go to the afterlife, what do you want God to say to you, if you believe in that sort of thing? What do you want God to say to you? And Robin Williams didn't miss a beat. He said, Mozart and Elvis are in concert tonight. They're seating near the front. I thought that was good. That was a good answer.
That's perfect.
So I got Robin Williams and Helen Ellison. Robards, I don't know if I can remember anything that Jason Robards said in particular, but I do know that he said, as far as interpreting the works of Eugene O'Neill, he said he demands your best and nothing less, and that was what he tried to give. So
Do
I guess
you
that's
have-
admirable.
Yes. Do you have a favorite personal quote?
A favorite personal
speaks
quote
to you?
overall?
I have one that's
I have
not-
many that float in and out of my head. I really do. I don't know if I have one that I could nail down. What's yours?
It was taken from an issue of American Heritage magazine in the 1920s. A bunch of literary and famous people were asked, what would your epitaph be on your headstone? And this was, I can't remember who said this, but my favorite is, I never had imitation fruit in my dining room.
I like that. That's good.
Because
I like
it
that.
operates on a couple of different levels.
Many different levels, yes.
And so that's mine.
Even take it at face value, it's still good.
And I would love to put that on my headstone.
Just talking about people who have gone before us. Like I said, if we were doing family members or things like that, my pick would be my father's father, my grandfather. And he used to say things. He had very humble, folksy type of wisdom, and he would say things like, it takes all kind of people to make the world go round, and then there's you and I. And I thought it was a very sweet thing, and I thought that doesn't necessarily speak on a grand level about anything, but like it's. I like that because that was his way of saying there's a lot of things out there, good and bad.
There is
A lot of bad, of course, but we have each other. I like that. That was his way of saying, don't worry about it, more or less. Or I would say, it's funny how things work out, and he'd say they usually come out in the wash. Things like that, yeah. So I don't know if I could nail those down, but I like those. And I think Woody Allen said, I would never want to be a member of I would never want to be in a club who would have someone like me as a member.
Oh,
That's a little negative, I guess, but I thought that was funny.
that is funny.
Woody Allen also said, I'm not afraid of death, I just don't want to be there when it happens.
Yeah, do I have to be there?
I guess we don't have to show up.
Hopefully not for a while. Anyway, that is our topic for today. We will be considering many topics in the future.
Yes.
We're already in discussion about having guests, and so we certainly hope you've enjoyed this. If you have any suggestions for any topics you'd like to see, we certainly recommend that you let us know. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We will bring you further ephemera, as we always say, at the end of the day.
Everything is off topic.
Have a great Mother's Day.
Thank you.